today's episode, we are going to talk about the writing of poetry. And as you know, poetry is music. And that is why I am with my seven here that I enjoy playing at my free time. Some of the most enchanting moments in my life occur when I visit high schools to talk about poetry. When my name is mentioned, sometimes I hear students murmur a statement that may not make sense to many people. They say, kukuru kakara, kukuru kakara. And of course they say this while laughing. Now, this is a refrain in a poem entitled My Journey to Mombasa. I wrote the poem many years ago when I was an undergraduate student at Kenyatta University. And it was published in a book entitled Studying Poetry in the 1990s. I have gone ahead to publish 2 poetry anthologies for young readers, namely Caught in the Wax and Wonders and Worries. But none of the poems in these anthologies rival the popularity of that poem entitled My Train Journey to Mombasa. There must be something in that poem that makes it stand out. Indeed, it was a set piece for primary schools during the National Music Festival 2019 edition. I think this is something that any aspiring poet should know. We shall examine these elements of poetry, but let us first debunk myths about poetry in this country. It may not be useful to overstress the fact that our handling of poetry, especially in high schools, has made students hate the genre. Teachers have made the appreciation of poetry difficult. I have, in my line of duty, sat in poetry classes and listened to teachers teach poetry on many occasions. Unfortunately, I always emerge with apprehension over the approach and methodology to the subject. In most cases, teachers encourage students not to enjoy poetry and writing poetry, but cram definitions of technical terms. And I think here lies the crux of the matter. While it is obvious that poets utilize technical devices in the crafting of poetry, the beginning of our appreciation and composition cannot be to isolate these devices and define them. In the same vein, when we listen to music and discover that it nourishes our spirits and hearts, we do not begin by describing how various instruments have been played and how they blend to produce that sound that remind us of things close to our hearts. Though all of us enjoy music, we rarely direct inquiry into its production. I think teachers in most cases put the cart before the horse in their approach to poetry. Teachers have killed poetry, and the corpse they present to students in schools invokes fear and a dread that cannot inspire writing of poetry. The universe we live in is structured in a poetic way. Everything in the physical world is rhythmic. Even our bodies are made in a definite form. Listen to your heartbeat. It beats in a certain consistent way. Now listen to how you breathe. We pull in air and push out in a certain pattern. You may even choose the pattern you want. Human beings respond to nature by imitating it. That is why all of us can be poets if we verbalize these rhythms in our lives. We are surrounded by poetry in our lives. Through poetry, we articulate our joy, our happiness, bitterness, hopes, fears, and expectations. Poetry, as it were, illuminates reality in a special way. That is why I appreciate my cock for making a certain sound repeatedly as we continue to talk. Poetry is an art form that attempts to illuminate through the process of invocation. It is a genre that is most inherent in the self. It pushes past the phenomena of event, personality, and thought to the very center of being. It was, I think, Pope John the 23rd who argued that it is an art form that takes us totally out of the world and gives us a taste of heaven, a moment of grace flooded with the splendor of enlightenment. In poetry, there is a margin of mystery that denies analysis. It leads to an unveiling of our reality and place in the universe. More importantly, poetry is born out of an intense emotional charge and elevates that which is private, and that is joy, pain, sorrow, aspirations, to a vivid experience of communication. As children, our mothers and aunties sing lullabies to send us to sleep. When we were young, we sang and recited poetry as we played. Our first years in school were the most interesting because we learned most of the things through poetry. Remember the time we were in nursery school? We never got tired singing and reciting poems. At funerals, we sing funeral dirges, and in weddings, we sing wedding songs. All of us love music. We spend our time listening to music from our radios and television. Every nation on earth has a national anthem. All these are forms of poetry. We may therefore say that our lives are decorated by poetry. Can we now hazard a definition of poetry at this juncture? Yes. It is a genre of literature composed by a poet, which uses language creatively to express thoughts, ideas, and feelings in a delightful manner. Poetry is organized in stanzas, unlike prose that is organized in paragraphs. A stanza is a unit of lines which decides the shape of a poem. Poems have different genres, including narrative poems, elegy, lyrics, and epics, among others. The poet uses language creatively. He or she selects works and patterns them in such a way that they appeal to both the ear and the eye of the reader. The language of poetry is different from the language of ordinary speech. Poetry is an art which has to do with interrelationship of words in a formal design. We have to look at how the poet uses words. Words are therefore an important medium of poetry. The poet uses figurative language to express his or her thoughts. This language enables the poet to create mental pictures in the reader. The language used is that of connotation and denotation. Denotation refers to the literal meaning, but connotation refers to associations that are connected to the word. We may refer to poetry as the language of metaphor. It relies on associating things with others. The poet also exercises economy of words. Few words are used to express a complex thought. Thus, poets employ refined language. The selection of the words is done carefully in order to express the thoughts, ideas, and feelings. The poet looks at nature and uses it for inspiration to explain how human predicament puts them in a certain state. The language of evocation enables the reader to gain awareness of intricacies of life. So, in a single word, a poet may express a mixture of elements and thoughts. This is what makes a poem stand out. And on that note, we come to the end of today's episode, in which we looked at the art of writing poetry. On behalf of my crew, Neka and Fami, I want to welcome you again and again to other episodes coming to you from our Sukari Estate, our Sukari Avenue,